we're delighted today to be joined by Alex Opacic.
But I think it's one thing people trying to help you and doing it. It's another thing you truly applying yourself. But I was playing semi-professionally and also working in sales. Just happened to land in a job in sales. I actually found that I played basketball better when I had something else to do that's outside of basketball, or my mind was focusing on something else along with basketball. I found I was a little bit more relaxed. I felt like more of a holistic human, and even I even performed better in my job. The job I was doing was quite stressful. It's sales, but the basketball court was almost like a release from it, right? Then basketball started being more fun for me again. So I think, and there's been studies I should have, don't want to fact check if you want to fact check, but there's been studies done where athletes' performance, some people have found it tends to be better when their mind is focused on other things outside of sport.
That sounds a little bit like a technique we talk about called controlled distraction. So when you're feeling the heat, very often it's useful to go off and do something completely different, but something you enjoy. One of the things that I've just picked up on is that you said you went into a career in sales or business development. Why do you think that is a relevant career for athletes?
I find that working in sales, there's a similar adrenaline rush to sport. So I find it's a similar adrenaline rush. And the better in sport, the better you perform, the more you get paid, and the more you win. Similar in sales, the more you perform, the better you are, the more you're going to get paid. And I think, in sport, I love the chase of being better. Similar in sales, I love the chase of trying to find more clients and winning. So
I think what you're tapping into is something that we call the challenge construct in the mental toughness concept. It's seeing the world as full of opportunities rather than threats, wanting to go after them, learning as you go along. But I noticed one thing that you use the word winning a lot. So that's winning's important in sport. Winning's important in sales. I'm just going to check something out with you. I think there's another similarity between sport and sales, in that the truth is that salespeople win maybe 10% of the time. You might do 10 pitches, you win one, and you go berserk when you get that one. There are very few bits in the commercial world that are like that. You've got to win all the time. But sports like that as well. You don't win everything.
I find that the more successful the athlete was, and the longer they're a professional athlete, the harder it is for them to transition.
Whether it's a sense of identity or kind of just, like you say, being used to doing something that you're really good at. It's the best feeling, I think, is we talk about sort of flow states and things like that. Doing something that is challenging, but you're really skillful at doing. And how do you find something else that you care about being good at? And then you actually find that you are good at it. Actually, you have these traits, you have these skills, you are really good at other stuff. And when you start doing those other things, then you might get the passion might follow once you realize you're good at something. Because we all like doing stuff that we're good at, right?
Try and coach them through and convince them to change that mentality from I want to find something I'm passionate about to I want to find something where I can learn and upskill myself. And once you do and start getting better and good at something new, then you'll find your passion will find you, which is exactly what happened to me. Like I went into sales initially, I hated it. And I hated it for a long time, and I hated myself. I'm just not happy in life. But once I happened to switch my mentality from trying to find something that I love and I'm passionate about to actually learning and upskilling, I found my passion, which is this now, athlete to business, right? And now I feel like I'm playing basketball again.
How do you feel your own mental toughness has developed and changed over time from you know, college basketball through to professional, through to the early transition, through to more recent years? Have you become tougher, or has it been up and down, or has it stagnated?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I probably, you know, I'll give you my answer, and then I'd love to actually hear what you guys would say if I was to ask. Well, it depends on how you define mental toughness and which part of my journey here is mental toughness. Or so my answer is, over the years, let's, if I associate this with mental toughness, right? Let's assume I do. I am now. My answer is that over the years, I've learned to lose better. Like I've learned to fail and just be okay with it, and learn and move on and just keep going. You know, as Paul Lyons constantly reminds me of it, and I think instinctively I've done it throughout my career, is just follow the process without emotional attachment to the results. And let's associate follow the process with just taking action. I think over the years I would lose, or things would happen to me, but I never kind of just, you know, sat there and soaked on it, or felt sorry for myself. Or even if I did feel sorry for myself, I didn't just sit there and do nothing about it. I was always constantly just taking action, trying things, and failing, and, you know, sucking at it. But eventually I guess I failed so many times that I was, oh yeah, this is just another part of my life. And eventually I just learned to deal with it and get better and better. And as I said earlier, fail to succeed. And I think the pressure of losing and failing is gone. You know, it's almost like, oh whatever, just move on. So I think, yeah, I've just failed better over the years. Is that mental toughness, or is that, I don't know, what would you call that?
Well, I think what I really like about that is where you talk about taking action, Alex, because I think look, mental toughness is developed experientially. We can put on a webinar to, you know, and say, developing mental toughness webinar, here's an hour. The webinar doesn't develop your mental toughness. Okay, the point of the training is that it'll encourage you to think, to go put yourself into different positions, go put yourself through different scenarios, experience failure, experience adversity, but maybe based on something that you've taken a slightly different lens to it this time. You maybe think about things a little bit differently. And it's that experiential development then. And that's why I love that kind of phrase, the taking action. So taking action when you fail.
So we got Josiah Igono. If I can kick off, Josiah, mental toughness has figured a lot in your career up to date. And of course, you did your PhD in mental toughness. What attracted you to the concept? What took you to the concept?
There were my two research questions were, does first language have any statistically significant impact on mental toughness? We know that through Worth-Sapir theory, that one's language, right? Whether it's Chinese, whether you're from China, it's Chinese. Whether you're in English speaking, it's English, or Spanish speaking, it's Spanish. One's first language determines how they view the world. You know, we know there are certain words that do not transfer in languages. So does one's first language, in this case, Spanish or English, does Spanish or English impact mental toughness? And in like fashion, I looked at locus of control, right? Does one's locus of control, looking at Julian Rotter's tremendous work, does one's locus of control have a statistically significant impact on one's mental toughness? And for those listening, just to put it very simply, one's locus of control is either internal or external. So somebody who is internal, who has an internal locus of control, typically takes ownership of their future. They think that things are in their hands, they're responsible. Whereas somebody who leans more towards an external locus of control puts their success right in the hands of fate, deity, chance, luck, circumstance. And so I looked at these two questions to determine if they had an impact on one's mental toughness.
Yeah, and that sounds great, and it's interesting. We're actually looking at some cross-cultural stuff in some ongoing research we have, because of course I wouldn't be an expert at all in language and linguistics, but I know a Spanish sports psychologist who has a completely different view, because she simply, through the language she uses, talking about how the lens that we look through, but always tells me how it's difficult to explain this sort of paradigm to somebody who only speaks English, because we don't have the words for it and stuff. So I know there is something really interesting there, but I don't have enough knowledge to be able to unpick it. So what did you actually find were the answers to those, Josiah?
Yeah, I found that, first language did not have a statistically significant correlation with mental toughness within the data set and the population that I had at the time, and using English and Spanish, it did not have a statistically significant correlation with mental toughness. That's what I found. And in terms of locus of control, right? Locus of control did have a statistically significant correlation with mental toughness. As we all know, when you start looking at the 4 C's model: control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. Control, life control, as per the 4 C's model, and emotional control have very much to do with locus of control. And so that being one of the, sub areas of the mental toughness framework, we did see that locus of control, we had to, the null hypothesis was rejected. So it did have a significant correlation with mental toughness.
We've started talking about sport quite a lot. Why do you think mental toughness has a particular resonance with the world of sport?
When you start looking, that's a great question. And when you start looking at sports is, many people would say, it's the microcosm of life, right? Many people pay billions of dollars every year to go and watch sporting events, whether these are amateur events in little leagues or whether these are the professional sports that we have come to know and love. And one of the things that happens is that individuals, regular fans who attend and frequent these games, we tend to see ourselves autobiographically in the stories of others. We tend to see ourselves in these athletes, and we love the fact that they're disciplined and they can make these oohs and ah type plays. And when you start looking at that, and we start studying the research, one of the things that we'll find is that when you have at the zenith of sport, when you have two athletes who are of like background, of like talent, like ability, the biggest separator are psychological components. So now we start playing a different game. The game no longer is physical anymore, because you have athletes who've been training for years and decades. And here you are at the zenith of sport, at the pinnacle of sport. And the biggest separator between two athletes are psychological variables. I believe that if we're not assessing, we're guessing, and so we use assessments. And one thing that I tell my athletes is that there is not one assessment, right, in the history of mankind that can measure the totality of the human experience. There's not one, because if that existed, we'd all be multi-billion trillionaires, because we figured everyone out, right? And so I do use the MTQ-48. I do teach the model when I do corporate engagements, when I'm working with athletes and speaking engagements. A lot of those concepts I still use because I believe that they're powerful.
Now, you've now spent the last couple of years working in the corporate world as well as the sports world. Do you notice any differences in the application of mental toughness? Are there any issues in the business world that differ from the issues in the sports world? Yeah,
there are differences and there are similarities. I would say that when it comes to mindset, it's similar. It's just a different game. It's a different game, right? The corporate game, the business game is different than the athletic game. I just had a podcast not too long ago with an old dear family friend who helped scale a business to $50 million in a couple of years. And I asked him, we started talking about how he did it. And one of the questions that I asked him was very similar to what you just asked me, Doug. And I said, is it easier to have an athlete's mindset? Or actually, I asked him, is it harder? I said, is it harder to have an athlete's mindset or a business person's mindset? And his response was very interesting. And I agree with it. And this is why I'm sharing it. He said, humans are interesting. And I'm paraphrasing. He said that when you can take away human emotion from things, it makes it easier. Mm-hmm. So he answered my question without answering my question.
What is it, Josiah, that you like about the idea of like working with young people? What is it that kind of draws you to a passion for that?
Well, I've always done stuff with youth sports, whether it's ministry, whether it's me being a coach. But I didn't mention this earlier. But do you know and I did not publish this in my dissertation because I was going to publish it, but I was told by my advisors that because my research question did not address this area, that I shouldn't publish it. And I'm like, okay, whatever. But one of the most powerful things that I found with mental toughness in my research, I can't speak for everybody who's done research on mental toughness. One of the most powerful things that I found is that there was not that age, right? One's age did not have a strong correlation with mental toughness. Another way to say that is that once someone can understand the concept, they can use it in perpetuity. Because what we did was we took the ages of all the athletes I took the ages of all the archival data of all the athletes that were used in my study, and I compared it against the mental toughness scores, and their age had no correlation, meaning once they understood it in their language, they can be mentally tough. They can start the path to learning what it means to be mentally tough.
Maureen Keegan. Maureen can justifiably claim to be a pioneer in the application of the mental toughness concept in an organizational setting. I mean, genuinely, Maureen is one of the first people that we worked with in an organizational context. Have you come across the link between mental toughness and team working in your experiences?
Yeah, I think mental toughness and being able to kind of have an awareness of where you are and where other people are is key to a successful team, really. And it's something certainly with my team, we've all kind of done the mental toughness questionnaire. We've spoke about where we think we are and why we think we are, and that shared knowledge really supports and help each other, because having that knowledge about each other as well. For instance, the last time I think I did the MTQ48, I came a 6 on commitment, which is like really kind of middle of the road, and I was a bit like, forgetting for a moment that it is me who filled in that questionnaire. It's normal.
It's normal. It might be middle of the road, but
I
that's
looked
actually
at
normal.
that 6 and I went, a 6 for commitment.
Yeah.
I'm so committed. I should be committed somewhere. And I took exceptionary. And then I kind of was sharing this with my team, and they said, yeah, Mo, but look at the narrative. Look at the narrative, and it says, you always, or you mostly always achieve what you set out to do. However, you will be attracted to paraphrase now, the next new thing that comes along, and you will move. And I thought, yeah, that's me. But being able to use that within a team is really powerful, isn't it? Because, it's like then starts to give people permissions to say, Mo, are you doing that thing again about moving on to the next new shiny thing? Before we finish this project, etc. And so, but it's whether you've got that openness in a team in order to be able to do that, because it does require trust. And I think trust is at the heart of anything to do with the team, if I'm honest. If any team is going to be successful, you have to have trust in the team. You have to know that you've got each other's backs, that, you know, the group is greater than the one, and all that kind of stuff. I don't think any organisation is perfect. I've never worked with a perfect organisation, and I don't think I ever will. And it is all down, like, trust all comes down to personalities, and it's not what you say, it's what you do. Often people will bring to a coaching session a situation they're struggling with, and 80% of the time those situations people are struggling with tend to be over personalities, over relationships, over they said they do that and they didn't do that, and then this happened, and now it's all like, and we haven't achieved our target, and that's the way it kind of it gets all wrapped up together. And it's always based on actions, choices and actions that have come along the way. So it's, as if you're lucky enough to have a coach or a team coach, it's understanding and unpicking those actions. So what is it that happened before this? And what could have made it different? What could have you done to make it different? What could have you done to make it different? So it's having like restorative conversations. So in terms of culture and trying to develop that type of culture, a colleague and I, Ken Harrison, you know, so we developed a model and we called it the Integrated Resilience Leadership Model. And by leadership, I mean everybody is a leader. So you can be, a leader in your household, in your community, in your team, etc. It's not about a job title. And we embraced 3 different concepts in that model. And one is mental toughness, one is restorative practice, and the other was mindfulness practice. Now, they were all practices and they all had tools attached to them. And at the heart of them was emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I really like that. I like the link you're making there with mental toughness being much more around our cognitions, the way that we think and appraise situations, but being able to take that through to behavioral, how did you actually act in this situation? And that kind of allows people to tie the 2 things together. So I can see the real value in that. Thanks.
And another area that I think that I find really useful on the same sorts of lines is the Time to Think by Nancy Klein. I'm nearly giving you a song then, wasn't I? And I think that, that the whole concept, certainly in a meeting, that everybody gets a chance to contribute in it, because often in organisations it's the loudest voices get heard, and people, because they feel as though, or maybe what I've got to say isn't as good as what somebody else has got to say, or they never shut up, so I can't be bothered, I'll just sit here and say nothing. The time to think is a concept where you can go round a table and everybody gets a chance to say what their ideas are on this issue. If you genuinely haven't got anything to say about it, or you haven't got a view to contribute, then you just say pass. And that ensures that everybody in a meeting has a chance to actually contribute before you come to the summing up where you're going to take your actions forward, and everybody feels heard.
I like the point that you're making there about the world is changing. Do you think mental toughness still has a relevance?
Yeah, it does. I think probably the world is changing to catch up with the mental toughness stuff we were doing back in the early noughties, because it is. I think it very much is. It does certainly still, because whether you like the word in mental toughness, because I think sometimes that wording puts people off because it sounds a bit macho, doesn't it? We live in a fast-paced society. We live in an ever-changing world. I think the pandemic has shown us that. We have probably more things thrown at us in 24 hours than our ancestors have ever had before.
I agree.
So if we aren't kind of mentally tough, or don't have the tools in our kit bag to use to support that, then it's probably not going to be the best outcome for us on an individual basis. During COVID, we were finding out what we had to do by watching the news, because the paper hadn't hit us. And So it's like there's not many organizations where that happens, is it? Normally a board makes a decision, and that decision is then got a planning time, and then you've got an operational time, and you've got a review time. Often we have to respond very, very quickly. For instance, I didn't think my team, an OD team within a local authority, would be getting a day's training off the army, then having to recruit and train 200 people and setting up lateral flow testing centres during a pandemic. I don't think any of my team signed up for that. It's a very rapid, responsive, but obviously that brings its mental challenges with it. It brings its mental scars with it as well, and obviously trying to keep yourself motivated and creating an environment for people to motivate themselves, because I don't think anybody can motivate somebody else. I think we can just create an environment to motivate people, for people to motivate themselves. But it's being able to put the appropriate support mechanisms in for people. So because I dealt with something quite similar and was absolutely fine with it, and one of my colleagues dealt with something and actually they fell apart afterwards, that's okay, because we're all different individuals, but it's how we support that person to come back from that really, to be able to work with them, to know that it is okay, and that the only person you should be benchmarking yourself against is the person you were yesterday, nobody else. And that's kind of, for me, from a coaching perspective, that's certainly what I'd be working with people about what was it that made them feel that way, and also to accept those feelings, because until you accept them and accept the validity of them, you can't actually move on. So that's something that I think I'd recognise in people, and hopefully give, any organisation should be able to give somebody the support to deal with whatever, if the job makes it more difficult for them.
I love what you just said there, Maureen, because John and I we'll completely agree with you. We're kind of on a mission to get people to understand that they are all individuals, they're all different. There are 8 billion people on the planet, and they are not 2 types or 4 types or even 16 types. They are individual, and we need to understand them as individuals if we're going to help them or develop them. Or from my perspective, I'm always thinking about optimizing people's contribution to society so that society can grow.